Collins gave me a smile as I twirled in front of him. I was glad he was in a good mood today. "You look beautiful," he said, pulling me in by the waist. He kissed me softly. I giggled. "You're too soft." "Only for you, Melissa. Now let's go or we'll be late." I followed him outside, and we got into the car. We had a function to attend. Collins said his workplace was organizing an event, and they were told they could bring their significant others. Collins and I have been together for about 6 months, and I moved in with him last month. I loved him. And although we had our issues like every other couple, I knew our love was strong. We got to his office building and went to the hall. The event was just about to start. Collins introduced me to his colleagues, and I tried to keep their names in my head. Collins went up to get his award, and I had never been prouder. My eyes misted. He deserves it. Collins is the most hard-working man I know. I turned to see one of his colleagues smiling softly at me. I racked my brain to remember his name, but came up short. "He is, thank you." I faced forward to see Collins looking straight at me. His eyes were narrowed. He returned to his seat with a terse smile. I broke out in a sweat, wondering if I did anything wrong. "Congratulations, man!" Collins barely glanced at the man beside me as he mumbled a thank you. He grabbed my elbow and told me we had to leave. I grabbed my purse and did my best to look like nothing was wrong as we left the hall. The ride home was filled with tension, and I dug my nails into my palms, dreading the worst. Tonight had been going so well. Collins refused to look at me, and he went in immediately after he parked the car. I scrambled after him and followed him to our room. "I'm sorry," I said, wringing my hands. Collins turned to me and looked at me up and down with disgust in his eyes. "What did you do?" he asked. I told him I didn't know, but he was angry and I was only trying to make things better. He asked me why his colleague Buck was looking at me the way he was. I frowned in confusion and tried to explain to him that he misunderstood the situation. I told him that the man only complimented him because of the award he got, and there was nothing else. Collins didn't believe me, and the eyes that held so much adoration for me now looked at me with scorn. "Slut, that's what you are. How can I ever trust you?" I bowed my head meekly, refusing to let him see the tears. I only repeated that I was sorry. He came up to me and grabbed a fistful of my hair. He tugged, and I yelped in pain. "Please, Collins!" He yelled at me to shut up and flung me across the room. I hit the floor and landed on my arm painfully. This wasn't the first time Collins would be getting violent with me, but I kept hoping every time would be the last time. He loomed over me and looked at the tears on my face. He sighed regretfully. "You know I love you. You can't keep hurting me like this." He stood me up and hugged me. I sobbed in his arms and stiffened when I felt his hands roving across my body. I protested, but he ignored me. When I told him I wasn't in the mood, his brown eyes filled with anger again, and he dragged me to the bed. I tried to scream, but he covered my mouth with his free hand. He bunched my gown up to my waist and pinned me down with his legs. I was powerless to stop him. He unbuckled his pants, and I closed my eyes, accepting my fate. Perhaps if I didn't struggle, it would be less painful. I'd thought about leaving him multiple times, but I found it difficult to do because I loved him, and I was scared of what he would do if I tried to break up with him. I knew he loved me. That was why he got all possessive. I used to work as an editor in a news company. Collins told me to quit because he didn't like the way my male colleagues looked at me. He said he could provide for me, and I knew he was only looking out for me. "My friend is coming to stay with me for a couple of days. He'll be using the guest room. Are you prepared to meet him?" I nodded and went to check the guest room so I could be sure it was clean. Collins left for work after giving me a peck on the forehead. My arm still hurt, but the pain was fading. Later in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. I felt comfortable around him, and I led him to his room. I told him he had to eat first before anything, and we went to the kitchen together. Henry smiled at me as I set the bowl down in front of him. He told me to sit, and started to ask me questions. We fell into an easy conversation, and that was how Collins found us, laughing together. He and his friend did the bro hug thing, and Collins came up to kiss me. I sighed in relief. There'd be no danger today. I woke up suddenly, my throat dry. Collins was sound asleep and didn't move when I got up. When I got to the kitchen, Henry was drinking water, and some of the water spilled to the floor. I moved past him, mumbling that I had to drink water. I slipped and fell forward, crashing into Henry. We both got knocked to the floor, my body on top of his. What the fuck? I jumped up to see Collins approaching with murder in his eyes. I stuttered out an explanation, but he didn't hear it. He smacked me with the back of his hand, and I crashed into the counter. Bro, you can't hit her! Collins rounded up on Henry and punched him in the stomach. Henry bent over, clutching his stomach. Collins came back to me and bent me backwards over the counter. The edge of the marble dug into my lower back. Collins, wait! He was unstoppable, and I watched in horror as he crushed my fingers in his grip. I screamed and heard my bones snap. Henry came up behind him and pulled him off. Collins grabbed the knife on the counter next to me and whirled on his brother. Henry jumped back and evaded the slash aimed for his neck. He reached for the knife in his hand, and there was a brief struggle. They fell to the floor, and Henry was on top. Collins suddenly stopped moving, his wide eyes staring at Henry. Henry cursed and went to dial 911. I saw the life leave his eyes, emotionless. I felt so numb. My hands were near useless, and I said nothing as the paramedics lifted me into their van. All I knew was that I would never subject myself to something like that anymore. I had seen him across the supermarket aisle that Wednesday when I was out doing shopping. His hair rested in his temple, bouncing with every step. He clearly didn't overly oil it, and I liked him for that. It was just cut recently, I noticed. He had a sharp jaw and his skin was lightly tanned. He was one of those people whose clothes fit them perfectly. Obviously, he was new in town. Everybody knew everybody here, and he stood out. It was winter, too, so the fading tan must have come out of a machine. Aplenty in the city, and not our little town. I was drawn to him, and while I did my shopping, I subconsciously watched him. We met at the counter, and he smiled at me. The casual smile of a stranger. Not too interested, not backing off either. Good-natured. I returned a smile of my own in equal measure, then quietly took stock of how I looked. Even though I came out for a quick store run, I was thoroughly covered for the weather, and so only my face was out there. I wasn't terrible to look at, and since he looked, I got bolder. As the cashier was scanning my liquor, chocolate, and ready-to-microwave turkey, I turned to him and turned on the charm. Hey there, stranger, I began. New here? He laughed a little laugh and replied, That obvious, huh? I nodded, so he continued. New is what I am. There was a short silence as the scanner was beeping over my items. I pointed to his basket. January shopping? You could call it that, but I'm really just stocking up on supplies for the house. I wanted to ask where he lived, but it was too soon. I'd find out later. Nice. You'll be with us long? I pried. He smiled disarmingly, paused up his Ken shopping to be scanned. I think I will. Till most of next year, maybe. We'll see. I muttered, We sure will, under my breath, and watched my stuff get packed and handed to me. I grabbed the bags and stretched my free hand out to him. I'm Christy, by the way. His eyes twinkled and he firmly grabbed my hand. A jolt of something that felt like electricity quickly passed from my fingers through me. Nothing romantic because I could usually tell. I'm Grant. Nice to meet you. Pleasure's mine, I said. He had no idea. I left the store. Outside, I was struggling to put my shopping bags in the trunk of my car. There was a tinkling as the store door opened and shut, and he popped the trunk of the car right next to mine. It was an old Ford, but I couldn't resist. Sweet ride, I said, suppressing laughter. He got the joke and laughed. You know, it's a rental, but yeah, I chose it in particular for its sweetness. We both burst out laughing, and he shut his trunk, hesitating a bit before he spoke. Say, Christy, do you think we could get dinner together later this week? That was quick, I thought. I pretended to consider it and answered, Sure, why not? He breathed a sigh of relief and asked if the weekend was fine. I agreed and gave him my number. I'll call you, he said before driving away. I smiled at myself all the way home. Maybe the first month of 2022 wouldn't be so lonely after all. The week decided to be agonizingly slow, but it eventually gave way for the weekend. And on Saturday morning, Grant called me and we had a friendly chat. He asked if we were still on for that evening, and I casually answered that I was. He was just as funny as the day at the store, and the conversation ended amiably, and I looked forward to a nice evening. I cleaned around the house, buzzed from the call. I had advised him on what restaurants were available as he was new in town. The options were painfully few, but he made a good choice. A quiet mom and pop setup at the edge of town. They served steak as well as burgers and fries. There was wine, too, although I hadn't ordered one the time I came around here. Grant picked the bottle, which was red, since they only had red, but it was good. We put in our order, and the old ancient rituals began. So how long have you been in this beautiful town, Christy? Grant ventured. Well, all my life, I'm afraid, except for the time I went off to college. And where was that? Austin, Texas. Nice. He digested that with a sip of his wine, and it was my turn. How about you? Where'd you go to school? England, actually, he said with a serious face. Wow, but you have no accent. He laughed at that. I didn't acquire one, did not see the need. So what brings you to our little town? At that moment, our steak arrived, and there was a pause in the conversation. We began eating, and he raised his head to look at me. I came here for rest and peace. I nodded. Our town was serene enough for someone to find those things here. Plausible. Little conversation was made while we dined, and when the time came to order a dessert, we chose the same mint ice cream. He finished first and asked that we go to the park. You know the park? I asked. Yeah, I drive past it sometime. That was curious because one simply did not drive past the park. It was out of sight of the main roads. I brushed it away, and when we left the restaurant, it was dark outside. I followed his car to the road entering the park, and we left the cars there. I was still surprised he knew the way. It was empty as it was a cold night, but we were both well covered. We sat on a bench and began to talk. Soon enough, we had come closer to each other on the bench, drawn by warmth and other more amorous intentions. He turned to kiss me, but when he put his hand on my neck to steady my face, I felt woozy, the kind of feeling you get when you drink something that's been I shrugged his hand off and felt fine again. He appeared surprised and came in again for another try. The feeling returned again, and I knocked his hand away this time. He was smiling, that smile. And then he forced both hands on me, and even though I struggled, the woozy feeling came faster. When I was sufficiently dazed but still awake, he used one hand to begin stripping my coat off. I screamed, but it came out as a murmur, too dazed. My coat had come off at this point, and he kept going, reaching to take my shirt off. I fell. His rush to take my clothes off had pushed me to the edge of the bench, and one nudge took me downward. As soon as I landed on the cold snow, my senses rushed to me. I took off running. The cold air lashed on my face and bit me. Trees flashed past in the darkness. Luckily, my gloves were still on, so my fingers weren't getting numb. I kept running, but the snow wasn't that easy to plow through. I tripped twice and looked behind both times. I didn't see him anywhere. I also did not know if I was getting closer or farther away from my car. Then I saw the blue and red lights of a cop car. I started to scream and cry for help, but a louder scream shot out from behind me. My left eardrum burst and began to bleed. The cop car didn't stop. It seemed like I was the only one unfortunate enough to hear the scream. Running was harder now, but I knew he was definitely behind me, so I kept going.
Wait!
He called out. I heard his voice was different, but I knew it. It was deep and grisly. And when I stumbled out into a clearing in the park, he landed there too. Dropped, more like it. He was on all fours, crouching like he was ready to leap at me. My breath caught and my thoughts ran. I thought I had orchestrated our meeting, but it turned out I was just a pawn, a victim. I was weak, so all I could do was shut my eyes, raise my arm over my face, and scream. I heard something solid connect with a body. I thought I was hearing what was happening to me, but when I opened my eyes, the scene was different. Grant lay on the ground, whimpering silently. An axe handle stuck out from his back. An old man in ragged clothes stood nearby and wiped his brow.
Sorry for the fright, sweetie. They just keep coming back. But I've got this one good.
A loud sound woke me up, and my eyes went straight to the clock on the wall. It was late, 11 o'clock in the night. I heard movement at my front door, and barely a moment later, my door opened. I had fallen asleep in the living room while reading for the test I had in the morning. I laid there with my eyes open in panic. I couldn't move a muscle. I could only move my eyes, so I tried to follow their movements. There were two of them, one blonde-haired and the other had dark hair. One of the dark-haired guys chuckled, sending a shiver down my spine.
You pretty little thing. She can't move?
The other one said.
I don't care, man.
The first guy replied. He ran his hand through my hair, smiling down at me. I wanted to scream out for help, but I was paralyzed. I could only watch in horror as he caressed my face and his partners carted my things away. I just moved in 3 months ago, so my things were relatively new. I had saved up money in my sophomore year to be able to live on my own, and now I was being robbed. Tears began to fall from the corner of my eyes as the guy pulled down my shorts, revealing my panties.
Jake, we can't afford to be distracted,
the blonde-haired partner said. Jake didn't reply. He only whistled softly as his gaze ran over me. His fingers traced my thighs and inched upward. The blonde-haired guy left my apartment, carrying a bag filled with my stuff. I started to feel like a weight was lifted from me. I tried to wiggle my fingers and they obeyed. Jake had no idea I could move. His attention focused on my bare thighs. I knew I didn't have a lot of time before the other guy came back, so I had to act quickly. In one swift motion, my hand whipped back and grabbed the lamp that they had somehow missed and smashed it on Jake's head. He yelled in pain and dove for me, but I anticipated his move and moved faster than he expected. He crashed into the couch with a muffled bang. I raised the lamp again and brought it down on his back with all the fury I felt, screaming like a banshee. His partner rushed in and paused when he saw me. I must look like quite the sight. My hair was flying in different directions. My mouth was open in a silent scream as I hit Jake again with the lamp, not caring that I was wearing only a tank top and panties. I was sure my screams would have alerted the neighbors. I only had to stall them until the cops showed up. The blonde-haired guy stopped mid-step and stared at me for a few moments, catching up to my plan.
Let's go!
He yelled.
Cover blown!
Jake staggered to his feet and they both ran out. I dropped back on my couch, totally exhausted. My heart was still beating very fast. I couldn't imagine what would have happened to me if I hadn't been able to move at that moment. There was no denying it. I had to get help. I wouldn't allow myself to be that vulnerable ever again. I tried to still the slight tremors racking through my body as I held the lamp tightly to my chest. I was still terrified and I laid awake for a long time, jumping at every slight sound before exhaustion lulled me to sleep.
In all my 22 years on Earth, I never thought that the one thing I would ever be afraid of was sleeping. You may wonder what I'm talking about. How can I be afraid of sleeping? Well, let me just tell you exactly what happened so you can get a better idea. This entire period of terror took place about 1 year ago. There weren't any signs that the first night would be different from the countless others I had. I came home after being out with some friends. During that day, nothing out of the ordinary happened. We watched a movie, had some fries, typical things you do on a Saturday. They all wanted to go drinking after 11 p.m., but it wasn't quite my cup of tea. I would much rather stay at home and relax, so I said goodbye to them. All the while, they were screaming at me, "Boo, you're such a buzzkill," while laughing. But I was fine with that. I got home, took a shower, and then got ready for bed. Not long after, I fell asleep. What the hell? I said to myself while opening my eyes in the middle of the night. I felt like something was pinning me down to the bed, not letting me move. I could only move my eyes. I tried to get up, but I couldn't. What's going on? I tried to say, but my mouth wouldn't move. I was stuck. The next thing that came across my field of vision scared the living shit out of me. There she was. A woman standing in the doorway, looking at me with deep black eyes with no trace of white. She was smiling, but barely, and her fingers looked like long, sharp claws. The woman had greasy black hair covering a part of her face and flowing down to her elbows. Also, she was wearing a lacy dress which seemed to be stained with blood. "Help! Help!" My brain was on high alert, but I couldn't move a muscle. My eyes were moving all over the place, looking for something to help me out of this situation. But I couldn't do anything. All I could do was watch that woman who broke into my house and hope that she will spare my life. Eventually, while eyeballing the woman for some time, I fell asleep. In the morning, I woke up and immediately got out of bed, checking to see if I'm all right. Then, my eyes concentrated on my doorway. I slowly walked there to see if there was any trace of what I saw last night. Did I dream everything? But it felt so real, I said to myself while calming down. The day went by as normal, and I forgot about what I thought I dreamt. Fast forward, and I was in bed again, being exhausted from the gym. I fell asleep, and to my surprise, at around 2:30 a.m., I woke up again. I knew what time it was because I could see the clock on the wall, but next to it, in the doorway, was a familiar face. The same woman smiling at me was back. I tried to scream and move, but the same thing happened. I was pinned to my bed, but something was different. She took one step towards me. I was freaking out, but my muscles didn't want to listen to me. They were asleep. I kept my eye on her and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I was certain that I didn't dream. I was certain that someone broke into my house. So that day, I went out and bought everything necessary to make my house as secure as possible. Locks upon locks. "This will keep that weirdo out," I said while installing them. I went to bed confident that nothing like that would happen again. But boy, was I wrong. "Stop! Stop! Please, leave me alone!" I thought, while at the exact same hour, 2:30, I woke up to see the woman walking towards my bed. She took a few more steps while I was helpless. She was right next to me, staring into my eyes almost like she was after my soul. I screamed inside as hard as I could while she reached her finger towards my face. It was getting closer and closer until everything went black. I woke up in cold sweats, not knowing what to believe. I went online and typed in exactly what I saw. The woman and the fact that I couldn't move. That's when I found out about sleep paralysis. After learning about the concept, I never saw her again. But each night before I fall asleep, she's there in the back of my mind, not wanting to leave me alone.